This is a section on nutrient availability and guidelines. 4. Will grid soil sampling work for my livestock farm? First of all, we're going to look at nutrient credits. Most of the credits, of course, are with N credits. We have a couple of major credits. We have alfalfa or other previous crops that we've grown on the land. And we have N credits from previous manure application. Let's take a look at the N credits that are available to corn from alfalfa. Current University of Minnesota recommendations are built on stand density. When we have a pretty good stand, meaning we have a 4 or greater plants per square foot yet, we have a pretty good credit. In fact, there's almost enough nitrogen to take care of all the needs for that first year's corn, and half enough needs for the second year's corn. Even with poorer stands, there's still a lot of N credit available. This is an important thing to consider, especially when a lot of alfalfa stands, when they're plowed up, that's where we put down some manure, and we really are doubling up on our nitrogen on those particular fields. This just really comes down to economics. There's more research that's showing that there's maybe a little bit more variability in this system, but in some cases maybe even higher credits than when we expect. And the university is actually developing a method of predicting these alfalfa nitrogen credits. Let's take a look at this chart on manure nitrogen availability. This is a pretty good chart. It has an awful lot of information on it. First of all, just look at this line right here. It shows the method of incorporation, or actually how soon manure gets incorporated into the soil. One thing I noticed, no matter what the species we're talking about, the sooner and the better the manure is incorporated into the soil, the more of the nitrogen we have available for the corn that year. The rest of it is just plain lost. Secondly, we want to look at in year 2, if you notice on each species, the second year credit is the same. Well, why is this? Well, some of the nitrogen is just tied up into the organic matter structure of the manure and isn't going to be available until the second year. So regardless of how we put it on the first year, it's still going to be available the second year. So those are some real numbers to look at. When we're dealing with manure and the nitrogen guidelines for corn, when we're applying manure, we got a real simple system. Are we looking at high productive or medium productive soils, and are we following corn, or are we following soybeans? Very, very straightforward. Let's look at this table on corn phosphorus guidelines. Actually, there is a table like this for phosphorus, potassium for all the major crops, but we're only going to look at this chart in this slide set. As we get our soil test back, we have a test all the way from very low to very high based upon either Bray or Olsen test. And then we also go down and look at our yield potential that we're shooting for, and we can go across and look at our phosphorus needs. What I really want to point out here is when our soil tests get on the high side, where we have over 21 parts per million Bray, we really don't need any extra broadcast phosphorus, and they're really only looking at some starter. But even if we look a little bit further, on the bottom here, when our soil test gets over 25 parts per million Bray, there's even a real question whether we even need starter fertilizer in those situations. I just want to quickly look at this slide to do another illustration of the same point. That as our soil phosphorus content gets higher and higher, there really isn't any yield response once we get over 21 parts per million Bray. The manure nutrient availability. With nitrogen, it varies a lot by the species of manure that it comes from and how it's applied. So we need to spend a lot of attention to this aspect of the nutrient availability. But with phosphorus, it's a lot easier. Regardless of what species we come from and how we apply it, based upon the lab test that we have, 80% of that phosphorus is available the first year. The same for potassium. Regardless of species or type of application, 90% is available the first year. Let's summarize our nutrient needs. For corn, it varies a lot with the credits we have available and the fertility of our soil. But with phosphorus, for our corn and alfalfa, once we get over our 21 parts per million Bray, we really don't need any higher phosphorus levels than that. And for soybeans, we're adequate at 11 parts per million. For potassium, over 160 parts per million is more than enough for corn and alfalfa, and 120 for soybeans. So what does this mean? Well, quite frequently we see phosphorus and potassium levels quite a bit higher than this in some of our fields that have a lot of manure. And it's just an illustration to show that we really don't need any more than a 21 grade phosphorus to support production for our main crops. Let's look at this chart. Even though it's older data, it's still just as applicable today as it was back then. We have two different sources, dairy and swine. We look at the NP and K. What we have here is what we call our book values. And then here's another one of just a series of a number of other tests that show some average values. But I really want to illustrate over here is what we in a range. Look at the huge variance that we find in these tests across all these species and nutrients. A lot of variability. And I just want to illustrate this because it's so important that we test our manure. We can't depend on book value for giving us a very good results in planning our manure application strategy. Well, this concludes this session of nutrient availability and guidelines for will grid soil sampling work for my livestock farm.